Hello, I'm Stephen Boucher, and I'm going to talk to you today about Henry James and his book, Daisy Miller: A Study. Genevieve Eastman and Harold Kupart, they wrote a biography about Henry James in your book, The Norton Anthology of American Literature, Volume C. After reading that, I found out that Henry James was born in New York City on April 15, 1843. He was one of 5 children. He came from a very well-off family. His father was a philosopher, his brother was the leading psychologist of the time in America, but most importantly, his mother was interested in writing, and that's really what got him interested in writing. Since they were well off, they traveled a lot. So James really didn't have a chance to become a regional writer. He became more of an international writer. He spent a lot of time in France and was able to become fluent in French. So he kind of had conflicting ideas about culture between American culture and European culture. And that's really where the story of Daisy Miller starts off. Back in America, Daisy Miller, the study, was seen as a disturbing work that went against traditional teachings of etiquette for its time. Many critics wrote about the story. One of these reviews was done by Dunbar. In Dunbar's review, the revision of Daisy Miller, he points out that writers on etiquette used Daisy Miller as a horrible example of vulgarity. What could be seen really as vulgar in Daisy Miller? Well, at that time, parents were supposed to chaperone their children, and Miss Miller wasn't chaperoning her daughter. Her daughter was out all hours of the night with unmarried men and flirting with scores of other men, not to mention her young male child was out with rotting teeth and running wild and yelling. He was totally unbehaved. This was seen as vulgar at that time. Later on in his revision, Dunbar continues to explain what could have made this story more and or less vulgar. Another critic was Oman. According to Oman, James received a scolding from a highly articulate woman in the cosmopolitan world. Now, why would a high upper class woman be scolding James for writing this story? Well, James depicted the upper class just as bad as he depicted the lower class. Daisy at the end came out to be innocent, but the upper class already cold-shouldered her and didn't want to deal with her no more. So it kind of shows the upper class as snobby, while it shows the lower class as either the Millers as either acting like lower class or just totally ignorant of their surroundings, which ends up to be the case. Another critic, Randall, points out that whenever 2 people meet, there's apt to be a comedy of misunderstanding, and when 2 people from different cultures meet, the chances are considerably multiplied. We can see this at everyday life. Like if I was to invite somebody that's a Hindu to dinner, there would be, a conflicting interest of cultures, because I like beef, and Hindus do not eat beef at all. So if I was to invite somebody over and I didn't understand their culture, I would have probably cooked beef and it would have led to a misunderstanding. That's kind of what happened between Winterbourne and Daisy, and the upper class and the naive upper class of the Millers. They really didn't understand each other's culture. While what was going on in America at that time was like flappers and women were becoming more independent of themselves. And the European scene, they were still traditional etiquette, like proper. And that's what was going on over here. That's why Daisy was seen as vulgar. James knew what he was doing in his work too. He points out that Miss Costello, Winterbourne's aunt, very high up class, says that the Millers were hopelessly vulgar. They were seen as hopelessly vulgar because they were intimate with their servants. Like at that time, upper class people, they were supposed to be upper class and servants were lower class. And they weren't supposed to mingle like that, but they had their servant with them on vacation. He was watching the kids. He was in their house. So they were very known to their servant. That looked vulgar at the time to them too. Not only that, like I said earlier, the parents are supposed to be chaperoning their children, and Daisy was just running wild in their eyes. Personally, what I think on the whole subject is I don't care what Daisy Miller was doing. If that was my daughter, and this is now 2010, that would be totally fine really with me. But in conclusion, she did break the rules of society at that time, and she did not, adhere to the etiquette code. So she had to stand liable for the consequences of being cold-shouldered and being kicked out, even if she was, not thinking she was doing anything wrong. Just like ignorance of the law is not the reason to break it, she should have been more informed on the choices she was making. Even as people tried to inform her, she still ignored them. Alright. Hope you guys have a good night.